Good afternoon. I'm Fabio Santeramo, and I'm professor in agricultural economics and coordinator of the Agri-Food Initiative of the Florence School of Regulation at the European University Institute. Today, we want to focus on the EU vision for agriculture and food that has been released this year in February. The vision is the strategy of the European Commission on the future for the agri-food sector, looking ahead with clear ambitions and commitments to fairness, resilience, and competitiveness. As part of our agenda, we promote debates on agri-food policy issues, and following our previous events on sustainable trade, strategic autonomy for fertilizers, and sustainability in agriculture, today we focus on the EU strategy on agrochemicals. Let me also say that later this month, the Florence School of Regulation will deliver an intensive 3-day online course to explore the key strategies behind the vision. If interested, please take note, as we will give you more details during this webinar. Today, it's my pleasure to debate on agrochemicals with a terrific set of speakers, starting from Klaus Berend, the director of DG Sante, and Ice Hiltheis, director at DG Agri, followed by academics and representatives of businesses and the civil society, people that are dedicating their career to understand and improve strategies for successful crop protection. The vision points at the chemical strategy for sustainability of the EU Commission. It stressed the ban on imports of products connected to the most hazardous substances and most hazardous pesticides, and the need to access the export of those hazardous and banned chemicals, including pesticides again. The ambition is to reduce the use of harmful substances, but this has to be coupled with the introduction of biological and innovative alternatives for crop protection. Later this year, the Commission is expected to put forward a proposal to accelerate the access to biopesticides to the EU market. These and other initiatives should accelerate this substitution process, which may actually be further facilitated by investments in technologies that modernize crop protection and crop nutrition. We need to evolve toward a new area where genetics, robotics, digitalization, and bio-based solutions play a central role. Health for crop protection, let me point at 2 technical aspects which are very important, and we will hear more from our speakers. First, the renewal of substances and the application for new active substances. Since the release of the regulation in 2009, the regulation on plant protection products, more than 150 substances are no longer approved, while about 50 applications for new active substances, mainly biopesticides, have been finalized in about the last 5 years. Biocontrols, particular insects and pathogens, are also rapidly increasing. And this because of that, raising awareness on this innovation is key through training and user-friendly tools. The second aspect I want to point is on the residues. Residues are important to grant market access. I'm here basically talking about MRLs. We're going to hear about from one of our speakers. They are very important, I was saying, but their technical determination is also very important. And this requires competencies in statistics, risk analysis, chemistry, food engineering. However, the trade implications of setting up MRLs are very political, economic, and strategic, and this calls for more research into those aspects. This is another point I think we will hear from our speakers, and it's something to keep in mind. As for the policy debate, 2 concepts should be stressed in my view. First, the CAP is greener, with more than 30% of the budget dedicated to environmental challenges. The schemes are so many that it would take a while to list them all, and the director will tell much more on this. The question is how effective and efficient the current set of measures is, and more important, how we should design the new CAP. The second aspect I want to point is on knowledge, innovation, and research. Those are pillars of the transition toward a more sustainable EU agri-food sector. How to further promote innovation while reconciling environment and productivity, and how to overcome frictions from interest groups. Those are questions I think we should reflect on. Now, with these remarks and questions, I leave the floor to Julie Pellizzari, who will introduce our speakers. And what I want to say, just please enjoy our webinar. Julie, over to you.
Thank you, Fabio. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests and colleagues, welcome once again also from my side to this important debate on the regulation of pesticides in the European Union, a subject that touches on the very heart of our food system, environmental safety and public health. So as we begin, I'd like to remind everyone that your participation is not only welcome, but encouraged. So if you have any questions or comments during the presentation, please feel free to add them to the chat at any time. We will collect your questions and address them in our dedicated Q&A session later in the program, where we look forward to an open and lively discussion. So today we are extremely privileged to have with us two leading voices whose work directly shapes the future of agriculture and food safety in Europe. Our first speaker is Dr. Klaus Berend, Director of Food Safety, Sustainability and Innovation at the Director General for Health and Food Safety of the EU. So Dr. Berend has dedicated his career to ensuring that European citizens have access to safe, sustainable, high-quality food. Under his leadership, the Director General has played a pivotal role in developing and implementing policies that not only protect public health, but also support the transition to more sustainable agricultural practices. Dr. Berend's expertise is particularly relevant as the EU navigates the complex landscape of pesticide regulation, balancing the need to protect crops and ensure food security with the imperative to safeguard the environment and biodiversity. So today we'll share with us his insights on how pesticide regulation fits with the broader vision of agriculture and food in Europe, and how policy can drive innovation and sustainability in this important sector. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Klaus. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Julie, for the introduction, and thanks for the organizers for sharing my slides. Good afternoon to everybody, and we can go directly to the next slide, please. As an introductory remark, I would like to emphasize that pesticides, or the more official term is the plant protection products, are highly regulated in the EU. And on this slide, you see the numbers and names of the most relevant pieces of legislation, which is on the one hand, the regulation governing the placing on the market, Regulation 1107/2009, which, to use the analogy, is regulating the beginning of the life cycle of plant protection products. Then for the use itself of the authorized products, the Directive 2009/128 on the sustainable use of pesticides plays a role. And then for the end of the life cycle, what is left from the application of pesticides, the residues on feed and food, are regulated by Regulation 396/2005 that sets out maximum residue limits, and I'll come back to that a little bit later. What's also important to understand is that part of the regulatory decisions are taken at the level of the EU, and this is marked in blue here on the slide and concerns a part of the placing on the market, and I'll come back to that in more detail a little later. And the residues, indeed, the maximum residue levels are set at EU level, but all other decisions are taken at member state level, in line with the principle of subsidiarity, as the nature of agriculture, what is grown, which crops, the climate, the weather, the geological, water, etc. conditions are very different among the member states. And in addition to these main pieces, there is other legislation that is also relevant, in particular the Water Framework Directive, or, for example, the Regulation on Classification, Labeling and Packaging of Chemicals, CLP, and the acronyms are all mentioned on in the box on the left down corner of the slide. Next slide, please. So the objectives of the regulation 1107/2009 are a high level of protection of human and animal health and the environment, but also safeguarding competitiveness of EU agriculture and increase free movement and availability of plant protection products across the EU. And the regulation that we have today was preceded by a directive that was adopted in 1991. And before that, all legislation or all regulation of pesticides was primarily left to the member states. So in 1991, we had for the first time a comprehensive set of rules at EU level, and that was further reinforced in 2009. We conducted an evaluation of how this regulation performs with regard to these objectives and published a report in May 2020. And that report found that it is mostly effective in protecting human health and the environment. However, implementation is not as efficient as it should be. There are in particular many delays in conducting the various procedures, the scientific risk assessments in particular for pesticides, primarily at the stage of the member states, but also at EFSA. The evaluation concluded that the regulation as such should not be reopened and changed fundamentally, but implementation should improve. And we have taken a number of actions to do that. With more or less success, depending on what the topic was. And you can find more information about all of that on the REFIT website, which is indicated on this slide. Next slide, please. Among the basic principles, or the most fundamental basic principle of the regulation, is that we have a two-step process. Active substances, which are the ones that actually have the action against the pests, are approved at EU level. And the member states then authorize all individual plant protection products that contain approved active substances for all intended uses on their territories. And this can be divergent among the member states. We actually have many active substances where products containing them are only authorized in a few or some member states, and only very few active substances where products containing them are authorized in all the member states. And that depends primarily on which pests are prevalent where, and also where do companies go when they apply for product authorization. They do not always go to all the member states. Active substances are thus approved in the form of a positive list, which is established in an implementing regulation. The number is indicated here. The approvals are limited in time, and if companies want to maintain their substances approved, they have to apply for a renewal of approval. We have different categories of substances: low risk, regular one, candidates for substitution, and so-called basic substances. In general, there's the principle of no data, no market. So if companies do not provide the data that are required for obtaining an approval or an authorization, they cannot place substances or products on the market. And the data requirements for that are set out in two other implementing regulations, which are mentioned on the slide. And the assessment and evaluation is conducted in accordance with so-called uniform principles, which are also set out in another implementing regulation. Studies that companies have to submit for obtaining approvals or authorizations need to be conducted in accordance with good laboratory practice. And application dossiers also have to include peer-reviewed literature from the last 10 years before an application is submitted. For co-formulants, these are other substances that are contained in the final product in addition to the active substance. Here we have a different concept. The regulation sets out that only those that are not acceptable because they create risks to either health or the environment are listed in a negative list in Annex 3. And we have in an implementing regulation also set out a criteria and a procedure for adding co-formulants as unacceptable in that annex. Next slide, please. For the approval of active substances, the requirements are set out in Article 4 and in Annex 2 to the regulation. The criteria are very strict. I think they are among, if not the strictest in the world, and we can come back to that a few slides later. And for an active substance to be approved, it is necessary that applicants show that there is at least one representative use of at least one plant protection product in at least one member state. If that is shown, the active substance must be approved. Among the criteria for the approval are some that are based on intrinsic properties, on hazards. They are often more colloquially referred to as cutoff criteria, and these are when substances are classified under the CLP regulation as mutagenic category 1A or 1B, when they are persistent organic pollutants, when they are persistent bioaccumulating and toxic, or very persistent or very bioaccumulating. For other hazards, the substances should also normally not be approved, but there are derogation possibilities when there is negligible exposure or when a substance is indispensable to protect plant health against certain pests for which no alternatives are available. And these are, for example, substances that are classified as reprotoxic category 1A or 1B, or substances that are endocrine disruptors. For all other toxicological or ecotoxicological properties, and the carcinogens, of course, I forgot to mention them. But for all other toxicological or ecotoxicological properties, the decision-making is risk-based. So member state and then EFSA conduct a risk assessment, the outcome of which is the basis for the Commission's decision on approval or renewal of approval. Next slide, please. So what is the situation today? And I mentioned earlier that we started regulating pesticides comprehensively as of 1991. It took then several years to develop all the necessary details for a first review of the safety of all substances on the market. When that started, there were about 1,200 or so active substances in use in the EU. Today, we are down to around 420. And they are listed in this implementing regulation 540 of 2011 in various parts. The details are explained here on the slide. And since regulation 1107/2009 came into force, around 156 active substances that were approved in the past under the first regime, under this directive from 91, are no longer approved. 2/3 because no company submitted an application for renewal, and 1/3 because the outcome of the assessment was negative and the Commission actively decided not to renew the approval of the active substance concerned. For farmers, this situation is a concern. We hear more and more voices saying that there are not enough active substances anymore available to combat plant pests, in particular in the light of emerging new pests as a consequence of climate change. So their main concern is that active substances are disappearing too fast for being used in agriculture. On the other hand, we have the voices from civil society, NGOs in particular, who actually reproach us regularly that we are too slow, that substances stay too long on the market, even though they should no longer be there, and that overall also we approve or renew substances that in their view should not be approved or renewed. So strongly conflicting views about among our constituents, stakeholder constituents in this regard. Industry, of course, also usually has an interest in maintaining substances or bringing new substances to the market, and is never happy when we decide that an active substance cannot be approved or not be renewed anymore. Next slide, please. Fabio mentioned in the introduction, the whole situation is not static in the sense that we start from a fixed pool of substances and we see them shrinking. We see that pool shrinking. And by the way, I forgot to mention, if we want to put these numbers in perspective, In the US, for example, there are more than 2,000 active substances allowed in pesticides, and in many other countries in the world, also many of the substances that we have banned in the EU are still allowed and authorized and can be used by the farmers there. But to come back to this slide, we have applications for around 10 new active substances per year. And on this slide, you have a breakdown per 5-year period on whether they are of biological nature or chemicals, more classical synthetic chemicals. And you can see that there is a trend that innovation is moving towards biological solutions or biocontrol active substances, and that the number of applications for new chemicals is actually declining. Next slide, please. This is then also reflected in the numbers of approved active substances, where we see over the years an increasing number of substances that we would or that are generally considered as biocontrol, even though there is no formal definition of that. And on this slide, you see them. These are in particular microorganisms, plant extracts, basic substances, pheromones or semiochemicals, as they are also referred to. And here you can see a steady increase. The farming community has a mixed view on this development. The organic farmers are very favorable because they are allowed to use such substances in organic production, or most of them actually. But conventional farmers often express doubts about how effective and efficacious these substances are, and also the fact that they are often more specific, and you need several of them to obtain the same result in plant protection than when using one chemical. Nevertheless, the trend is there, and it is a trend that we also want to support. Next slide, please. And we have already taken action to facilitate the procedure, this risk assessment and approval procedure for microorganisms. And we have reviewed for that effect, or to that effect, the data requirements. We have reviewed several guidance documents, all in the spirit of helping applicants to compile dossiers for active substances that are microorganisms and products that contain them with less work and with less demands. We keep working with the member states and stakeholders to provide training on these new requirements in order to make sure that the potential for simplification is really used. And we have provided training to the member states via our Better Training for Safer Food program, and we have also provided financial grants to member states to increase their expertise in hiring experts for microorganisms. There's also more work ongoing in the OECD on microorganisms to further develop the methods for conducting the required tests. And other activities going into detail for all of those would now be a bit too much for this presentation. But clearly, we have and keep working with member states and stakeholders to facilitate market access for microorganisms and products containing them. Next slide, please. There is indeed a need to convince farmers that these products work for them, and that they find their place and space in the market. And there is, of course, also a need to develop further biological solutions to replace chemicals. And we do this via financing projects under the EU framework and research program. The names are indicated here on the slide. We have also projects financed in these framework programs that help to train farmers and raise their awareness about the availability of these products and how they should be used, and so that they have maximum efficacy. It's also what we often hear from farmers, that advisory services that are there to help them for plant protection often do have insufficient knowledge about biological solutions, and therefore do not really advise, or are not able to advise farmers on the best way to use these tools. And last but not least, there are also support possibilities under the CAP, and the next speaker from the Commission will probably elaborate on that. And the authorities can also help by charging lower fees for applications for authorization of biocontrol products, as that is often also a hurdle for companies, in particular for small companies, when they want to bring products to the market. Next slide, please. As the event today was announced in the context of the vision for agriculture, let me now turn to that, for agriculture and food. And here, indeed, there is a very concrete announcement that the Commission will, in Q4 of 2025, as part of a simplification package, put forward a proposal that accelerates the access for biopesticides to the EU market. And there is also the announcement that we will reinforce resources in EFSA, the European Food Safety Authority, so that applications and dossiers can be treated more quickly and the products and the substances get to the market faster. And for that, on the next slide, the vision also announces that we will propose targeted amendments to Regulation 1107/2009. First of all, to introduce an actual definition of what biocontrol active substances are. I mentioned earlier that such a legally binding definition does not yet exist. And it will be interesting to see how the various stakeholders and member states will position themselves, as some have different views on what should be considered biocontrol than others. We will also propose that member states can grant provisional authorizations for plant protection products containing new biocontrol active substances while their evaluation in view of their approval is still ongoing. And the vision also said that we will create a fast-track procedure for their approval and authorization so that member states give priority to such applications and deal with them in a faster way than they do for chemicals. Obviously, there are other ideas and suggestions, and we have or are consulting stakeholders on that in the context of a study on regulatory aspects relating to biotechnology and biomanufacturing that also included a public consultation. And we will probably also launch a further call for evidence in order to collect further ideas and suggestions. We've also asked the member states in that regard, and we get letters from stakeholders. For example, from IFOAM, the organic producers have recently written to us with a number of suggestions. Many of them coalesce around the same ideas that are already mentioned on this slide, but there are some additional ones. Now, as the last part of the presentation, let me turn to the maximum residue levels, MRLs, that Fabio also mentioned in the introduction. So what is a MRL? It is the highest level of a pesticide residue that is legally tolerated on food. And there is an example given here for one active substance. Residues result from the intended and allowed use of plant protection products. As part of the application dossiers, field trials need to be conducted to measure the amounts of residues that are left on crops from the intended use. And when EFSA confirms that these levels of residues are safe for consumers, the maximum residue level can be set. Should also say that most of the MRLs, the vast majority, is actually set at levels that are far, far below any level of toxicological concern for consumers, because the amounts that remain after the intended use of the plant protection product are that low, and it's a minority where the MRLs are actually close to any toxicological level of concern. Next slide, please. I just mentioned that already. So the so-called good agricultural practice is the intended use of the plant protection product that is authorized. And in that context, the field trials are conducted. And then you get results. Sometimes the use might lead to a level of 0.01, another time of 0.03, another time of 0.02. And there are statistical methods then to determine which of these MRLs will be set. And for that, there are various tools available, including international ones, such as the OECD statistical calculator that is used also by other countries in the world. And if the residue level is safe, we set it. Next slide, please. So the system for setting MRLs is thus based on science and the assessment of risks of the residues in food for consumers that eat such food. And if EFSA finds that residues of a substance lead to a risk for consumers, we set the actual level that is tolerated at 0. And it's the so-called technical 0 because in order to monitor and survey this, technical or analytical methods are needed, and each chemical analytical method has a limit of quantification, and below that nothing can be determined with certainty. So the 0 that is a technical 0 depending on the measurement methods that are available. And if there is no health risk, then we set indeed the MRL, but as low as possible, often in the majority of cases much lower than toxicological concern. And this is in line with the so-called ALARA principle, as low as reasonably achievable. Next slide, that's my second to last. MRLs also have the purpose of facilitating trade, and one aspect of that is that they are set at EU level and not at member state level. So within the EU, the MRLs are uniform, and food commodities respecting them can be traded across all member states. And then also anybody wishing to import into the EU can rely on these MRLs in order to import into any of the member states. We have, in addition, of course, situations where there are crops that are not grown in the EU or they're not grown in sufficient quantity, and we rely on imports, for example, tropical fruits or coffee or tea. And here, the regulation foresees a mechanism that the producers in third countries can apply to obtain an MRL for this purpose of imports, and then they are called import tolerances. Or there is also a global commission under Codex Alimentarius that reviews data on MRLs and sets so-called Codex residue limits, CXL. And if EFSA confirms that such applications for import tolerances or Codex values are safe for European consumers, then we can also grant the MRL and the imports can take place. Next slide. In recent years, we see a trend that farmers in particular complain about the fact that many substances are banned in the EU, but they are still allowed in third countries, and that the farmers in third countries can use them and they cannot use them, and then that with the system of import tolerances, they can be imported into the EU, which they perceive as an unfair competition. And therefore, the vision announces that the Commission will seek a stronger alignment of production standards applied to imported products with the standards in the EU, notably on pesticides and animal welfare, and that we will establish a principle that the most hazardous pesticides banned in the EU for health and environment are not allowed back into the EU through imports. And to advance on this, the vision announces that an impact assessment will be launched that will consider the actual impacts of the possibility to set import tolerances for non-authorized or non-approved substances in the EU on the EU farmers' competitive position, which depends, of course, on many, many other factors than only the use of pesticides. And any solution, if we amend the current policy, would also have to be compatible with international rules, and there could be international implications of such changes. That concludes my presentation for now. Thank you very much for your attention. And obviously, if there are questions during the session, I'll be happy to answer to them.
Thank you very much, Klaus. It was tremendous, and I guess it will really feed the debate, and also is giving a lot of information, insights on how actually everyone that is sitting here can possibly support the agenda. But I don't want to take more time, so I will ask kindly Julie to move ahead, as we're going to have a debate at the end of all the speeches. Julie, I think you're muted. Yeah.
Here we go. Thank you very much, Fabio. So Here there is a training that is being organized by the Florence School of Regulation, and the training is on the Vision for Agriculture and Food, which is an intensive 3-day online course from the 25th to the 27th of June that will explore the key strategies behind this vision, including international trade partnership, risk management, and regulatory simplification. And participants will engage in discussion on the economic and regulatory challenges, the role of technology in sustainability, and the impact of climate trade and bioeconomy policies on the agri-food sector. So this is for letting you know about this training course, very interesting in this area of field, and we will share the link on the chat so you can know more about it and register. So I stop sharing this presentation and we can go ahead with our next speaker. We hear now from Dr. Gijs Skaltijs, Director of Sustainability at the Director General for Agriculture and Rural Development at the European Commission. So Dr. Skaltijs brings a wealth of experience in agricultural policy with a particular focus on aligning the common agricultural policy with the EU's ambitious sustainability goals. His work is central to supporting farmers as they adapt to new challenges, whether it's climate change, evolving consumer expectations, or the need for more resilient food system. So Dr. Skaltijs' perspective is invaluable for understanding how crop protection strategies are integrated into the broader agricultural policies and how these policies can help ensure both productivity and the sustainability for the future of the European farming. Both Dr. Berend and Dr. Skaltijs are at the front of shaping these policies for the future of agriculture in the EU, so their insights help us better understand the opportunities and challenges that lie ahead as we strive to create a food system that is safe, sustainable, and resilient. So without further ado, I welcome Dr. Skaltijs to the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I will try to share my slides. Hopefully this will work. Let's see. That's not very successful yet, is it?
I think we can see some black boxes, so we can also ask to our colleague at the FSR to share the screen, if you don't mind. So
for me, that is absolutely perfect. I saw that Klaus had this organized very well. So if your colleagues are able to do it, perfect, wonderful. Thank you very much for giving me the floor and for this technical solution. I think I don't, in this academic environment, I want to be straight on my academic record, but I'm not a doctor. But I still will hope to deliver you meaningful input for the deliberations on pesticides and agriculture in the EU. Thanks to my colleague Klaus Berend for this great overview of the regulatory side and also some of the policy challenges that are being faced. What I would like to focus on is the agricultural policy and crop protection, also in the context of this vision for agriculture. But here I would like to underline that we are, as part of the next financial long-term budget for the EU, working on a revision of the agricultural policy, which is supposed to come out next month. So I cannot really say much about the detail of it, but I think the gist of what we do today gives already a good indication of the orientations for the future. So if we move to the next slide, the first thing I would like to underline is that in what we call the CAP strategic plan regulation, which basically is a subsidy instrument to support European agriculture in different ways, there are a number of objectives. And one of the objectives includes the phrase, including by reducing chemical dependency. And this was added last minute in the negotiations, I think on the proposal from the European Parliament. But this gives an indication also of the orientation of the policy and of the support schemes that we have in mind. Another aspect that I think is important to underline is that all the support schemes, all these CAP strategic plans that member states develop must contribute to the objectives of a range of environmental laws. including Water Framework Directive, Birds and Habitats Directive, but also notably the Directive on Sustainable Use of Pesticides. So there is an overall framing of our agricultural subsidy policy that it needs to really support being less dependent on pesticides and also contributing to environmental objectives. And then if we move to the next slide, I've just given you a couple of an idea of where the money goes. So we are now talking about a 5-year strategic plans for every member state. And on average, and that you see on the pie chart on the left-hand side, about half goes to income support. Linked to conditions, we call that conditionality. It used to be called cross-compliance, so farmers have to do actions above the legal minimum to get this income support, but it is really support that's focused on their income, either as a small farmer, as a normal farmer, as a farmer in mountain areas, etc., but income support. And 32% is for instrument that supports specific environmental, climate, and animal welfare objectives. These are schemes that are offered by member states, and farmers have to apply for it. So it's not an obligation, as are these conditions that I talked to you about earlier. And then these environmental schemes are divided in a number of different components, which I will speak more about later in this presentation. The remaining expenditure is going to investments. As you can understand, some investments might also be highly relevant for the use of plant protection products, as well as rural development actions to ensure vibrant rural areas. Next slide, please. So I talked about these environmental payments, and we call that the green architecture. This is, of course, a horrible slide, but I will try to take you through it to give you an understanding of how this works. I already referred to conditionality. So all payments to farmers are linked to certain conditions that go beyond the legal minimum. These conditions are partially good environmental, agricultural and environmental practices, and partially are standards that are in the legislation which farmers have to fulfill. And if they don't fulfill it, they get a reduction in their payments. That's how the system works. And then on top of that, we have in the second green box in the middle of the slide, we have eco schemes and management commitments. These are fairly similar schemes that support farmers on top of the income support for specific deliverables in the area of the environment or climate or animal welfare. Some are annual, some are multi-annual, but these are really the more incentive-based schemes, if you wish. And of course, there are lots of other aspects for which support is provided that are very relevant. Let me click away, which is investment policy, risk management measures, obviously. Support for organic farming is highly relevant because organic farmers do not use chemical pesticides. We have some sectoral programs for example, the fruit and vegetable or the wine sector, which also have elements that support sustainable use of pesticides. And then on top of the slide, you see this very important aspect, and Klaus Behrendt already mentioned it, linked to supporting farmers in how to better use knowledge, how to better use pesticides, how to exchange knowledge, how to innovate in this area. So this is a very important aspect, often forgotten in the overall presentation, but really important to move farming forward. Next slide, please. So now I go through some of these elements of this green architecture to give you an idea of how we organize this and how we try to support farmers in reducing dependency on chemicals and to farm more sustainably. So first is conditionality. We cover about 90% of the European area. And I think what is important to underline is that we have requirements linked to the Directive on Sustainable Use of Pesticides, for example, that are in these conditionalities. And then you have to think of things like the certification of equipment, the certification of the users. Often in member states is a sort of diplomas for being allowed to handle pesticides, restrictions in certain protected areas, and the handling, storage, and disposal of pesticides. So these are sort of conditions that are linked to the overall payments for farmers. Next slide. So then I talked about these voluntary schemes, and we have, first of all, eco schemes. That's in the first pillar. So these are annual payments. This is maybe something technical for people who know more about the Common Agricultural Policy, but basically voluntary for farmers, obligatory for member states to offer it, but member states can design these schemes to target specific objectives they have in their country. It needs to be 25% of direct payments, so a good chunk of money. This indeed has to go beyond the conditionality. And there's two ways of doing this. Either you give it really as a top-up, but then it can't be linked to any production conditions, or you can provide it as a compensation for cost incurred, income forgone. You can imagine that a farmer is asked on a particular crop to not use certain products, or to, for example, mow later. If you talk about prairies, these are then additional costs, or these are incomes that the farmer doesn't get, and to compensate for this, this payment is granted. Of course, usually an average figure for a region or a member state. Next slide, please. So specifically for these eco schemes, you see here a couple of additional examples of how this can look: non-productive areas, rotation, conservation agriculture without pesticides, organic farming. So there's quite a wide variety. I think with more than 150 schemes overall in the EU that are eco schemes. And particularly, I think what is interesting from the results we've obtained in 2023 and 2024, we noticed that practices supporting sustainable use of pesticides cover 29% of total EU agricultural area. So a very significant share of area is subject to practices to reduce use of pesticides. Of course, some of these practices, like organic, there is no pesticides at all. In other eco schemes, the ambition level is lower, but still contributing to the reduction of use of pesticides. Next slide. Similar schemes exist under our rural development part of the policy. These are often multi-annual payments linked to area, environment and climate-friendly land management payments, but also investments, risk management, also highly important in the context of crop protection. But of course, also knowledge, innovation, and cooperation, some of those aspects that I mentioned earlier that are hugely important. Again, there's a minimum level of spending on these, and this is also based on this notion of cost incurred, income forgone. A farmer engages to do certain practices. There is a cost linked to this, and that is compensated by the public authorities, by the Common Agricultural Policy. Next slide. Here you see some examples linked to pesticides, for example. It can be use of integrated pest management beyond the obligations from the Sustainable Use Directive on pesticides that Klaus Behrendt already mentioned. It can also be support, for example, for multi-annual rotation, which also obviously has an effect on disease pressure on farms. Can also be support for investment for pesticide management. So a wide range of possibilities under rural development support. Next slide, please. So we have now gone through a number of the instruments that we use, the tools we use, the tools that are designed by member states, approved at EU level, in which subsidies are channeled. I think it's also good to see, what trends do we observe. And I always like to show the figure on organic farming. We have a very high ambition in terms of growth of organic farming. And the growth figures so far are not up to the ambition level we have, but we do see continued growth, despite some of the skepticism sometimes around organic in some parts of the EU, and despite the high inflation pressures, which put which slowed growth a little bit in the organic sector. But we see a continued growth from about 2% of organic of the European farmland area in 2000 to close to 11% today, which is, I think, a very significant message, and also highly relevant in the context of the topic of today's discussion. If we go to the next slide. So I wanted to focus a little bit more at the end of the presentation on this issue of knowledge and innovation, particularly because this is so important. we have a number of tools. All member states need to have a farm advisory service. They have a farm advisory service, which is partly subsidized by the EU, but it is highly important to ensure that farmers have advice available to them so that they can farm and use the latest knowledge. Another important tool we have for many years already is the European Innovation Partnership. And basically this works with so-called operational groups that bring together farmers, researchers, advice, business. So everybody interested in certain innovations for agriculture. And since 2014, we funded almost 4,000 of these and about 600 on pest and disease control. And you see on the slide here the reference to actually a prize-winning example of a machine to fight the Colorado beetle catcher. To fight the Colorado beetle, I say, to catch them. So this was a project that was first developed and then was scaled up. It went also from Holland to France, for example. Demonstrations were planned and executed across Europe, because what we really see as an important challenge and what we try to do with our policy is not only to bring people together to innovate, but then also to scale up this innovation. And that is I think, the key for the overall objectives of the policy. Next slide, please. So here you see lots of logos, and they're all from projects that are financed under Europe's Research and Innovation and Knowledge program, Horizon Europe. For agriculture, environment, bioeconomy, there's an overall budget of about 9 billion, and about a third of that is really for agriculture, forestry, and rural areas. And a lot of them are focused on plant health and crop protection from all kinds of angles. And I think that's important to mention. There is not one single solution, obviously, to protecting a crop. You cannot do only one thing. You always need to approach it from multiple angles. Pesticides, biocontrol, different farming methods, agroecological solutions. So many of these projects try to approach the issue from these different angles. And over the past years, given the strong focus on organic farming, there have been quite a few projects also focusing particularly on solutions for the organic sector. Next slide, please. So these are some examples on potato, sugar beet, and also the development of biopesticides. We already heard from Klaus the importance of and the growth in this area, and also the regulatory needs in this regard. So these are just examples of projects that have contributed to the growth of these of this sector, which is important, but indeed, as I said, is not the only solution. Next slide. And this is already another example of how we try to scale up innovation. Living labs is something we subsidize through the research policy to have real life places where solutions can be demonstrated, and farmers are invited. Farmers see how these innovations are implemented, and then we also have these things we call lighthouses, single farms that demonstrate these innovations. And through various tools, CAP Network, but also an EU Farm Book. It's a project where we try to disseminate project information and good solutions. I recently spoke at an event of this EU Farm Book project, which was really interesting, bringing farmers from various corners of Europe together, really also to share these innovations, but also then to spread them in their national networks in their own member states. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, this was my last slide. It was indeed. So with that, I would like to hand the floor back. And of course, I'm very happy to engage in the discussion and answer further questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It was also very, very dense. I personally appreciate it, and I think the same is really what the others think. You also gave a lot of insights on how actually the agenda of the Commission matches and cross with what us as researchers, academics um, do in our daily life. So thanks very much for this information. I will not don't want to steal time. So Julie, up to you. I think we are just on time. So over to you.
We're exactly on time. So I'm very happy now to welcome our next guest and speaker, Emilia La Monaca, research fellow from the University of Foggia, whose research focuses on environmental technical measures related to agrochemicals. Her work has been published in prestigious journals such as Economics Letters, Review of International Economics, World Economy, and among others. Dr. La Monaca's academic perspectives enriches our understanding of the environmental implication of agrochemical use and the technical innovation shaping the sector. So, Emilia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Julie, for the kind introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm pleased to take part in this important debate on the vision of agrochemicals in EU agriculture. Today, I'd like to focus on a topic that's becoming increasingly central to global trade, environmental policy, and agricultural sustainability, the environmental trade-related measures. I would offer a perspective on how these measures are reshaping the EU's regulation and trade of agrochemicals in the EU, and how we can better understand and respond to them with the help of data and evidence. But let's start with the broader picture. Agrochemicals are central to EU farming. They sit at the intersection of economic performance, environmental risk, and regulatory complexity. Economically, this is a major industry. It generates over 50 billion euros in annual sales. That's roughly 20% of total input costs for farmers. And about a third of those agrochemicals are imported. Here we start to see how trade, supply chains, and policy are tightly connected. But agrochemicals impacts stretches beyond the economics. Environmentally, these stakes are high. Fertilizer production alone accounts for about 1.3% of global CO2 emissions. And within the EU, more than 1,000 border rejections each year are due to pesticides residue, underscoring both food safety concerns and enforcement pressure. Politically, agrochemicals are increasingly under the spotlight. As anticipated by Klaus, the recent EU vision for agriculture and food prioritizes stronger oversight, building on more than 400 existing environmental technical measures, mostly targeting pesticides. Let me give you a concrete example. Flufenacet, a herbicide widely used in winter crops like wheat and barley. It's been a commercial success. In 2023, global sales exceeded $500 million, and they're expected to double within the next decade. In the EU, it's the top-selling herbicide. Sales have doubled in France and tripled in Germany in just 10 years. But there's a downside. Environmental assessment by the EFSA raised concerns over its toxicity to aquatic life that led the European Commission to withdraw its approval that will be effective from 2026. The story of flufenacet reflects a broader challenge, managing transition in a high-stakes sector where environmental objectives and trade dynamics collide. And yet, while these measures continue to grow in number and scope, our ability to monitor them remains limited. Data are fragmented, and there is a clear need for structured, consistent information to support both policy and practice. And this is where our contribution comes in. To address this gap, we developed the Environmental Non-Tariff Measures Database, a global open access repository that tracks over 6,000 trade-related environmental measures in more than 100 economies, covering the period from 2008 and 2023. And despite the acronym, let me reassure you, this is not the end. It's just the starting point. The database provides a foundation for analyzing how governments regulate agrochemicals and other products with environmental implications, and what that means for market access, compliance, and global governance. It's accessible through the Global Governance Program's website and available to everyone, policymakers, researchers, industry, and civil society alike. So how do we put this data to work? For research, the END database opens new avenue to explore how trade effects differ across sectors, whether environmental technical measures act as barrier, catalyst, or both, and how regulatory complexity shapes compliance and competitiveness. But the impacts doesn't stop at the academia. Industry stakeholders have reached out us directly. They want practical tools to monitor evolving market access conditions, anticipate regulatory shifts, and also respond strategically to upcoming bans and environmental regulations. And here is a preview. Based on the interest we have received from both public and private sectors, we are launching a training program to build capacity on these issues, and we share more details soon. The takeaway is simple. Agrochemicals are at the heart of the EU green transition, and policy is moving fast. It's not just about reacting, it's about anticipating, preparing, and staying competitive. And let me close with a call to action. Regulation is not a barrier, it's a blueprint for building better market. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I mean, those are very good insights. I think you have been perfectly on time, and I really look forward also to hear from Dela that has done a lot of research on MRL. So, Julie, if you want to introduce him, that would be fantastic.
Yes, now we have Dela Dom de Fiancor. He's an agricultural economist and a professor from the University of Göttingen in the Department of Agriculture, Economics and Rural Development, where he leads also the chair of Food Economics and Policy. He will address the issue of regulatory heterogeneity and its effects on agricultural value chains. Dr. Fiancor's work highlights the challenges and opportunities that arise when regulations differ across regions, impacting trade and the competitiveness of European agriculture. So, Dela Dom, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Julie, for the introduction. Do you hear me and do you see my slides? All right. I want to thank you all very much for the invitation. And in the next 5 minutes, I want to introduce you to some of the work that we have been doing in my research group, where we try to understand how cross-country differences in regulations on the use of plant protection products affect global agricultural value chains. We all know that a lot of what we consume now cross multiple borders before they get to us, and these differences in regulations matter. And in this presentation, I will focus a lot on the trade perspective, so only on imports and exports. And I want to thank Klaus very much. I think he's laid the foundation very much and makes my life a lot easier in the rest and makes the 5 minutes even just sufficient. So our starting point is the fact that there seems to be nothing standard about standard. So like Klaus exactly said, the reason why we have MRLs in the EU, it facilitates trade within us. It allows you to take a product from Germany and send it to the Netherlands, and it's the same product. But there is a global world out there, and there seems to be nothing really standard about standards. And so here is a simple case where you see the active substances, and we see that there are significant differences in what is a maximum residual limit established by the US and Japan, for instance, relative to what we are doing in the EU. The Codex Alimentarius Commission, which is also the international body regulating this, often sets standards that are sometimes a lot often higher than what we are setting in the European Union. And there are countries like China and many other developing countries that have no standards at all. And a lot of our products are coming from some of these countries. And why is this important? In the European Union, our standards are only getting stricter over time. And generally, standards are getting stricter over time, but even more so in the European Union. And since we are not producing everything we are consuming, what we try to do in our research group is to see how these differences in the regulations across the countries matter for trade, right? And one advantage about MRLs is we can objectively compare them. I mean, here we see if the EU has uncoverals using Mandarin, The EU sets a limit of 0.01 parts per million. The US sets 10. And so in this case, it is obvious that the EU is stricter. And so we try to use this to predict how they affect our trade flows. We begin first on the export side, so because often we try to see how this affects the third countries that are sending their products to us. And what we find, this is one of our papers in the European Review of Agricultural Economics, we find that indeed these differences in the regulations decrease our imports by 13 or almost 14%. And there are many other research that also supports this. I mean, trade within the European Union, of course, this goes higher, but trade outside the European Union is then lower. But then we started thinking, well, at the country level, this effect is there, but what is happening to the EU or importers in the European Union themselves, or in Europe generally? And also we wanted to do the analysis at the firm level, at the business level. And here again, we see that these differences in MRLs decreases trade, even more so for smaller firms. So here we see that we see a strong negative effect of these differences, but we see that it's even worse for smaller firms. And for policymakers, it's a lot easier if we interpret this effect into tariff equivalents, and we see that this one standard deviation increase in MRLs, which means that our standards at home are stricter than those abroad, is equivalent to imposing a tariff rate of almost 24%. So that's quite a significant effect. We try to understand the mechanisms, what could be driving this effect, and we see that a lot of it is a price effect. So import prices into the EU are increasing, and as a result, we are buying less. You can imagine that if there's a mandarin producer in Mexico who needs to export their product to the European Union, or if we want to import from them, then we need to get them to produce to our EU standard, but they could also produce to the much lower US standards, right? And so it seems like they are passing on the extra cost of production to us as higher import prices. The extent to which this passes through to consumer prices, this is something we could study in further research, but our research cannot answer that yet. All we can say is that these differences is leading to higher import prices. We also try to see if it leads to quality upgrading. We don't see this. So one way to interpret this is because many other firms leave the market, survivors could exploit the lower competition in the EU market and charge higher prices. This could be one of the effects at play there. And if indeed heterogeneity is a problem, well, of course, then homogeneity should have positive effects. And this is also what we see. What we do in this paper is we try to compare the Switzerland and EU standards, MRLs. They are mostly the same, but we see in 18% of the cases there are slight differences between the MRL set by Switzerland and the European Union. And we exploit this as a predictor of import, and we see that indeed when standards, of course, in the EU and Switzerland, that's a mutual recognition environment. But what we see is that even in this case, if the MRLs are exactly the same, we see the total imports increase, we see that the number of products that are traded increase, we see that the number of firms that are trading increase, and prices are also lower. And in this case, what we also see here is that the smaller firms are the ones that are better off. So when standards are different, smaller firms are worse off. When they are similar, smaller firms are better off. And so what is the policy goal? And this is also my last slide. The policy goal, of course, we should be moving closer to some regulatory convergence. Well, we know that this will lead to efficiency gains. It will also ensure that our supply chains are not concentrated in a few markets who can only produce to our standards. But there's an open question which I don't have any answer to, but whose standard then becomes the standard? And this is where I end my talk. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you very much, Dela. I was sure, we would have had a lot of more insights. I know your research since a while, and it's always very interesting to hear from you. I guess, we have heard from those two different researchers working on similar issues. It's now really time to give the floor to, businesses and civil society. So usually, maybe they have something to show and also some questions for our directors. And also let me remind that if anyone from the audience wants to put any question, please do it in chat, and we will collect any questions you may have. Julie, it's over to you.
Thank you. So this Q&A will feature Paolo Marchesini, General Manager of the European Crop Care Association, sharing insights from industry representing the practical perspectives of those navigating regulatory frameworks in day-to-day operations. And Martin Dermijn, Executive Director of the Pan-Europe, the Pesticide Action Network Europe, whose work ensured that environmental and public health considerations remain central in regulatory debate across Europe. So representing both industry and civil society, their contribution will ensure a balanced discussion also that reflects the diverse and interests at play in this vital policy area. Thanks a lot. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Maybe if you agree, I skip sharing the slide and save time for the Q&A because just 5 minutes I want to stick to my time. Well, first of all, Professor Santelmo, thank you very much for organizing this webinar and giving us the opportunity to join it. And just a couple of words about to introduce the association and then to share a couple of questions I was thinking about here in the presentation delivered by Dr. Berend and Dr. Skildaris. About the European Crop Care Association, well, the European Crop Care Association is the voice of the post-patent plant protection industry in Europe. This is an industry, in the association, I say, we have most members from the small, medium enterprises and focus on delivering to farmers post-patent products, also more commonly addressed as generics. Clearly, I mean, when we talk about post-patents, we are talking in terms of, kind of products, it's agrochemical products whose original patents have expired, allowing generic manufacturers to produce and sell them. Give me a look to, let's say, the global picture, global level. We are talking about around 85% of the total crop protection products placed on the market used by farmers in the world. And well, looking at Europe, even if we don't have any official data on the quantities, we can, let's say, assume that over 65% of the market of crop protection products is represented by post-patents. These significant numbers, reflects the benefits and the value these products deliver to farmers and producers. It's important to highlight this point in the frame of the broader discussion about the vision and before about the strategy before. So the value of post-patents comes from the fact that they are affordable, let's say, solution for farmers to address their needs to protect their crops. When we talk about post-patent, we are talking with a long safe history of safe use, let's say, and high efficacy in the fields. And this is particularly relevant in the frame of the challenges farmers are facing nowadays related, for example, to climate change. Now, we already heard that one of the concrete evidence that climate is changing is the fact that new pests are arriving in Europe. And farmers have to find a short time a solution to try to control, to limit the damage and possibly to overcome, let's say, the potential cost and loss coming from this crop. And generics patents are a solution which is very often the first line, let's say, for the farmers in the first set of tools in their toolkit for farmers to try to control this pest when they can, because they are active ingredients already registered, and the companies just need to work in terms of developing new formulation and delivering to the farmers. And clearly this increases food security for safety in time of economic and political uncertainties, let's say, like the ones we are living. It's quite important, let's say, keeping in mind also this aspect. Finally, before moving to a couple of questions, let me also stress one role that post-patents are playing in the agricultural sector. Well, generics in the agricultural sector are working exactly in the same way they are in the pharmaceutical sector. So they are really increasing the competition at the crop protection industry level because, clearly making available more solution, lower price to the farmers, create a pressure in terms of, on producer and developers of crop protection products. And this is important because this is one of the main drivers of innovation. So I mean, apparently it's the opposite of what people are used to think about post-patent, but post-patent are really playing a key role in boosting innovation and supporting the advancement of let's say, the effort of European agriculture to move to more sustainable, let's say, way of producing, including the adoption of biopesticides. In this, I mean, here into the presentation from Dr. Brand and Don Skitius, I came to my mind a couple of questions. One of them was somehow already addressed, but I would say the question is taking the same topic from a different angle. In terms of health policy, I mean, in order to produce in an economic and environmental sustainable way, taking into account both the current market dynamics and growing challenges caused by climate change, farmers need access to the broadest possible range of plant protection solutions, as I was just saying before, including active substances that are now off patent. In this context, our industry is facing a serious bottleneck emerging from the artificial extension of data protection mechanism. As you can imagine, here I can open and close just a window there. As you can imagine, when we are talking about post-patent, what really matters for the industry, what is really key in order to be able to deliver a solution to the farmers, is the proper functioning of the data protection mechanism. And this artificial extension of the data protection mechanism in practice prevent the registration of formulation that could offer farmers improved efficacy and better margins. This issue is not a secret. This is public. You can have evidence just looking to the time of registration and time the dossier move across the registration process across Europe. And so it is a well-documented known really for Commission to member states. In light of the above, the question is how does the Commission intend to take a concrete action to ensure that the provision and timeline set out in Regulation 11 of 2009 are effectively respected and consistently applied in practice? So this first question is more about, let's say, health policy. And then there is the second question I came to my mind. And this was somehow already addressed by Dr. Beren before. And it's about the fact that in the recent year, the Commission has played an active role in promoting the development of the biopesticide sector, in line with this goal of enhancing environmental sustainability of agriculture. However, in our view, the objective of providing farmers with sufficiently broad range of biological solutions to effectively control all major crop pathogens remains far from being achieved. So we appreciate, we understood, I think it was very well explained today, the effort of the Commission to speed up the registration process. But despite this, I mean, when the common agreement is that we will still have to wait several years before farmers have a solid and consistent set of toolkits to manage the pests they are facing. Moreover, the real-world efficacy of many biopesticides can only be assessed after several years of practical use in the field. At the same time, we are witnessing a rapid pace of non-renewal authorization of conventional crop protection solutions, leaving farmers with fewer and fewer tools to safeguard their crops, even in the short term. And this was also pointed out, honestly. The question is, I mean, we had a clear explanation of the effort the Commission is putting in place in order to speed up the registration of biopesticide and how to bring to the market in the shortest time possible, as much as possible, solutions. But my question is related to the other half of the story. So conventional product, how does the Commission plan to ensure that the transition toward more sustainable farming models takes these challenges into account and remains truly sustainable also from an operational economic perspective for farmers? In other words, our concern is that it's not about the final goal, but how to be sure that farming remain a sustainable, economic viable activity from now till the time the farmers will have a full set of tools to control and to protect their crops. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paolo. I think it was very interesting to have your view. And I guess you have already a couple of questions, so I'll just ask Julie to introduce the last but not least speaker, and then leave the floor to the two directors to reply to your challenging questions.
Yes, I introduced Martin before, but I will do very quickly again. So Martin Dermine is the Executive Director of the PAN Europe's Pesticides Action Network for Europe. So we look forward to hear your perspective from the civil society. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Julie. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you to the previous speakers for the very interesting presentations. I will try to be short to save time for Q&As. So, PAN Europe is an environmental NGO. We're based in Brussels. We do scientific, legal, and advocacy work. There is globally a massive support from citizens to reduce pesticide. Citizens are really aware of the risks posed by chemical pesticides. The pesticide legislations in Europe are really very good, but unfortunately, as Klaus Behren mentioned, they are not sufficiently well implemented, both at member states but also at EU level. So in our view, even though we have a strict legal framework, the fact that it's not completely implemented reduces the positive effects, positive impacts. We see it on the one hand because every year toxic pesticides are phased out from the market, even though they were sold for sometimes 30 years. Suddenly we realize, oh, sorry, they are toxic to the unborn, or they reduce the IQ of your children, so we have to phase them out, but they were used for 30 years, so there's a problem there. And clearly there is an insufficient assessment of the toxicity, for instance, on neurotoxicity, but also on mixtures. For instance, we discussed previously about maximum residue levels in food, but we have to know that the assessment, the toxicological assessment, is carried out substance by substance. And we know that in a lot of fruits and vegetables, for instance, now is the season of strawberries. Well, strawberries, conventional strawberries, usually contain much more than one pesticide residue, and this mixture is not properly tested. So epidemiological science shows us that chronic exposure to pesticides in general, not to one specific, increases the risk of developing a series of chronic diseases like cancers or Parkinson's disease. And one of the reasons probably that we still have an insufficient level of protection is the issue of conflicts of interest. Even though there are some rules, it's still not enough. We see it for the moment. There's a revision of the guideline on non-target arthropods, so basically insects protection. Well, the previous guideline is from 2002, and the one now that is under revision, there's still this problem of conflicts of interests of experts that are selected by the Commission, by the European Food Safety Authority, and that still need to be improved because it reduces citizens and environmental protection. So as the topic of the day is the vision for food and agriculture, in our view, it's really positive that the Commission and member states agree globally to increase the availability of low-risk substances and biocontrol. We also see it very favorably that the rules that are imposed to EU farmers, we also managed to impose them to imported food by reducing MRLs for EU-banned pesticides. And also what was not discussed today, I think, is the question of banning the exports of pesticides. We ban them in Europe, we ban them for use to protect our citizens' health, the environment, but then hypocritically we keep producing them, exporting them, making profit out on the back of the health of citizens in third countries that do not have a strict regulatory framework or a stronger political democratic system. But in our view, in the vision, what's missing is really a vision to reduce farmers' dependency on pesticides, including chemical pesticides, but also low risk and biocontrol. Since 2014, IPM, integrated pest management, is mandatory, but the uptake by farmer is really a failure. And we see it both with farmers implementing IPM, but also with scientific publications, is that IPM can make our farmers much less dependent to commercial solutions. And as it was presented previously, inputs, so pesticides, fertilizers, represent a very big cost for farmers. It's also a big cost for society in terms of externalities, but also in terms of cap money we have to give farmers to buy these inputs. And this IPM system can clearly reduce dependency, and this is clearly lacking in the vision. Biocontrol is strongly promoted, but biocontrol producers themselves say that it's not a silver bullet. You have to include it in a strong IPM scheme. So we need to, as was mentioned, develop the farm advisory services at national level with independent experts. And this is mandatory, but it's really not implemented by member states. And last point is that the vision, we would like to have it rewarding much more farmers who produce healthy, nutritious food in a healthy way. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Martin. I was actually taking notes because there are so many things to discuss and think about that is important to, you know, have an agenda. I don't want to take more time. I guess that I would leave the two directors. Please feel free to choose who want to go first for the last few words to reply the questions and also to, you know, have a reaction to all the speeches that we had today. I don't know, maybe we want to go with Klaus or Ice, whatever.
Yeah, sure, I can start. And I think
Good.
the last two statements perfectly illustrated what I said earlier. The demands on us from the different stakeholder communities are totally opposing. On the one hand, you heard Martin saying we should ban more, we should be faster, we should da. And Paolo was saying the opposite. No, we need more availability of chemicals for farmers and don't ban substances too fast, otherwise things will not work anymore. And this illustrates perfectly the competing demands that we face. Now, to respond to the very concrete questions from Paolo, I did not comment in my presentation on the issue of data protection because that is notoriously difficult, not only in our area, but everywhere. Data protection is there to compensate innovators. So if you invest in producing a new substance, in generating all the data that are needed for that, the data protection periods are meant to allow for recovery of those costs, same as patents, by the way. And I'm sure that if we had a speaker from CropLife, which represents more the companies that have patents and are innovating, he or she would not agree with what you said, Paolo, that there is an abuse of a system and things are not working as they should. I mean, we are very well aware of the problem that you mentioned, that the member states who are responsible for granting data protection are not fully harmonized when it comes to certain aspects of the rules. We work with them and try to incite them to have a harmonized approach and have the same and grant the same periods. But that is not always successful. I mean, we have discussions in meetings with them. We are also in close exchange with ECHA, who has Paolo's organization, who has brought the matter to our attention. But ultimately, as this is a responsibility of the member states, and the regulation very clearly says it, where a company feels that is a member of ECHA or another one that the data protection rules are not applied correctly, they need to seek remedy in national courts. That's how the legal order is set up. And on the second question, how do we ensure that substances are not disappearing too quickly? I mean, first of all, I want to emphasize that when the Commission takes a decision to ban or restrict the use of an active substance, it does not do so lightheartedly or because it wants to annoy farmers or deprive farmers of tools, but it is because the scientific assessment, the risk assessment, has resulted in findings that there are problems, either for human health, as Martin mentioned, or for the environment, which is also a strong possibility, for example, groundwater pollution or impacts on bees or impacts on insects. And here, of course, I want to strongly reject Martin's thesis that there are conflicts of interest in the work of EFSA or the Commission. We have a very strict policy, and EFSA also has a very strict policy in this regard. But to come back to Paolo's question, when there is a substance that is under scrutiny and where we are about to take a decision, it is because there are problems for health and the environment. The vision on this, by the way, also has a statement which says that we will carefully assess the availability of alternatives before restricting or banning substances, but then it continues, unless there are problems for human health or the environment. And that is always the case. When we are about to take a decision to restrict or ban a substance, it is because there are problems. Now, what we do is, in line with this commitment in the vision, we listen carefully to the member states in the standing committee. We also get lots of letters from grower organizations from many member states that always say why a particular substance or a particular use on a particular crop is extremely important and difficult to substitute. And this is taken very seriously. And we look at all possibilities to mitigate the identified risks via, for example, precision application technologies that are more and more deployed now in agriculture, or whether a reduction of the number of uses, a reduction of the dose per hectare, whatever measure can be applied to bring the risk down to an acceptable level and still allow continued use of the substance. This is always very carefully examined. Martin is not happy about that. I mean, he has challenged, and his organization have challenged several of our decisions in this regard, where we have prescribed risk mitigation measures as a condition for continued use. Because Martin and his organization think that these conditions of use are not strict enough, or not implementable in practice, or will not be respected in practice, and that therefore we should have banned the substance. So again, this illustrates this divergence of views around pesticides from different stakeholder groups. And maybe I stop here. Just one more thing that is also on everybody's mind these days, and these are active substances that are PFAS active substances. Here, Martin and his organization have written already several times to us that we should ban them all immediately, which would obviously be the opposite of what Paolo asked for, that any transition needs to be gradual so that there is time for replacements for the substances to come to the market. And we have a schedule for the review of all of these substances. Most of them are already ongoing and quite advanced. So voilà, another example of this dichotomy that we face constantly.
Thank you very much, Klaus. I mean, clearly there's a need for more. And I'm glad that we are actually planning more initiative, trainings, research, and the debates on this. I think we are exceeding the time we have allocated to this, but I would kindly ask Thais if he has a quick reaction to what we have heard so far, and then I'll be happy to close this webinar.
Thank you very much, Fabio, and thank you also to all the speakers, and a big thank you to Klaus, who has, I think, covered the ground in terms of replies. I think I want to pick up on one of the points that Martin said, that low risk and biocontrol is not a silver bullet. Indeed, there are in this area no silver bullets. And I think what we're trying to do with the Common Agricultural Policy is really make farming more resilient across the board, particularly also with regard to pests, disease, and really support farmers in doing this, give them incentives to do this. And I think that is really what the future of the policy is also about. I think one of the speakers, I think it was Emilia, said, you know, a regulation creates good markets, and that is precisely what we have. I think we are creating good markets here through regulation, and regulation is always shifting. We're of course always adjusting, but within that we want to incentivize entrepreneurs. Farmers are entrepreneurs to produce in a way that is as sustainable as possible and at least dependent on chemical pesticides. And for that we need a wide range of tools and measures which we are trying to get on the field every day through the Common Agricultural Policy. But with that, I am glad to pass the floor back, and would also like to say thank you very much for organizing this, which I thought was a highly interesting and wide-ranging topic with speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Indeed, I have to thank all of you for making this another success. I mean, another because we are really promoting a lot of debates. And we really look forward to debate more and to engage more in research, training, activities with DigiSante, DigiAgri, and all the passionate of this topic. So I want to just close here. I want to thank again Klaus, Heis, Emilia, Della, Martin, Paolo, and Julie, and look forward to see you for in the future events. So thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.